This is another iROAR podcast.
Kind of address this, basically turning it into questions of what is the relationship between humans and nature, and how can we explore and provide or find alternatives to just slaying or domesticating the wild. And this is also one of the things where I think that there is an opportunity to keep on developing the big AAA franchises in order to sort of find the kind of middle way, because by tradition in video games in particular, monsters or animals are there to either be slain or run away from. And to sort of find games, start designing games that allow for something else, would also be able to explore stories or narratives where you can choose or have the kind of agency as a player to find something in between.
Welcome back to The Animal Turn, everyone. This is season 8, where we've been speaking about animals and media with kind of explicit focus or tendency towards thinking about the interconnections between media, race, and species. Let me start off this episode by saying I am not a gamer. I love board games. I absolutely love board games. So maybe I am a gamer, but I love kind of tabletop board games where I get to play and get lost in that kind of, like, I'm a person that does puzzles, right? I enjoy that. But I'm not a gamer. I've never kind of gotten into playing digital games on my computer or an Xbox, although my husband did introduce me to a game called Unraveled that I've very much enjoyed playing. Anyway, I'm already getting sidetracked. I'm not a gamer, but today's episode got me so enthusiastic and excited to learning about gaming and seeing the potentials of gaming for thinking about human-animal relations that maybe one day I will become a gamer. Gaming is one of the most, if not the most, consumed media on the planet. So I'm delighted that we're having an entire session, an episode today focused on gaming. And my 3 guests are so knowledgeable. The amount they know about not only various different games, but the kind of politics and the tensions around these games behind the scenes is incredible. All 3 of them were very generative and open to thinking about gaming and the kinds of conceptual material space it created, that we just had a really good time talking. I so enjoyed speaking to my guests today. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Michael Rübsamen is a media and communications scholar at Lund University. His research interests are primarily in popular culture, from fandom to celebrity culture, wrestling, and reaction media. In his quest to further explore attention, interest, and engagement, he has now turned to thinking about games and gaming. And he wrote for the special issue a paper that considers the ways in which The Witcher engages with and thinks about animals. Osvaldo Cleger is fascinated with how media shapes our understanding of bodies, identity, communication, and history. His work tries to move fluidly between literature, visual arts, and digital media, and he always returns to the codes that govern representations. So that is how different representations emerge or shift or sometimes fracture in media, and in this case, games. His interest in bridging the humanistic traditions from the pre-modern to the contemporary is reflected in his engagement with video games such as Dante's Inferno or historical simulations, where his passion for classical literature, cultural legacy, and interactive media converge. Keung Yoon Bae, who we also call Becky in this episode, is an assistant professor of Korean studies at the School of Modern Languages. Her research examines the relationship between media production and state governance in Korea across different industries and eras, including 1940s imperial Japanese regulation of colonial Korean cinema and 1960s authoritarian control over Korean cinema. Her most recent works examine ownership and governance over video games and gaming culture in Korea. So they include a wide range of different interests in gaming and in media. And once again, it's just a fascinating and interesting discussion, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Just a reminder, if you're a fan of the show, please take a spot of time to leave a review or check out our merch store. Buying some of the merch helps us get finances in to support the show further, and leaving a review means that other people find the show. You can find all the details for this on our website. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Animal Turn podcast, Michael, Osvaldo, and Becky. It's great to have you on the show. A panel discussion is always fun because you get a variety of views. So welcome to the show. We're going to be talking all about gaming today. And I've got to admit, I know absolutely nothing about gaming. I do not play. I mean, okay, wait, let me take it back. Video games or like digital games. I know nothing about gaming. So I'm hoping to learn a lot from you today about what a game is, perhaps some aspects about what gaming culture is, and particularly why it's important to think about gaming in relationship to the theme of the season, which is media and power. And with any luck, to really also perhaps think a bit about why this might be useful for thinking about some of our relationships or ways of studying animals. But let's see how we go. It's a massive, massive concept, and I think we're going to unpack a lot today. I've enjoyed having some back and forth emails with all of you. So welcome to the show, everyone. Why don't we start getting to know a little bit about each of you? Osvaldo, how about we start with you? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your research and how you became interested in gaming or studying gaming?
Thank you so much for having us, Claudia. Well, I am originally from Cuba, and as I grew up, I probably was not exposed to the digital gaming world the same that people who grew up in other contexts. But I was always interested in media that is engaging to audiences in innovative ways. And I arrived through gaming, actually, through other forms of digital media. So once more digital content started to become relevant to humanities, and I learned about interactive narratives and digital poetry and all that, I realized that the most impactful thing that was taking place was actually outside the realm of literature, and it had to do with gaming. And by doing that, I also realized that gaming included new forms of storytelling that fascinated me since the beginning. And one thing led to the other. And suddenly I was playing video games, which, as I said, I didn't do growing up in Cuba as a teenager boy, and trying to understand the ways in which game designers and people in new media and digital media were trying to tell stories and were representing our world in ways that I had not thought about as a literature person.
Do you view games as representations of our world, or are they something completely different?
Well, in the way I approach it, I usually, because what I study is representation at the end of the day. Yeah, it was what I was doing before with literary text and film and other media. So that's my approach to gaming, is how they remediate or refashion things that exist outside the world of gaming. In the emails that we were sharing earlier, we mentioned, for instance, tabletop games, and how these games actually can inspire digital games. And so the same applies to literature, the same apply to storytelling. Games can remediate that, and in doing so, they also remediate identities the way they have been constructed outside the world of gaming. They remediate all sort of cultural traditions. So that has been my main focus.
It's interesting that you say that, because while I'm not a big gamer, I'm definitely someone who enjoys watching TV or series, right? And of course, when The Witcher came out, I was completely like, The Witcher is the best, because the framing, everything was so different. That opening scene with all of its gore, I was like, it felt so otherworldly to me, not only in terms of, the fact that you're busy slaying monsters and dragons, but even the ways in which the filming was done. And then my husband said to me, he's like, well, it's because it looks like a video game.
Exactly.
I didn't know that. How was I supposed to know that? But he was very, very aware of that. Now, Michael, I know you've done some work with regards to The Witcher.
Yep.
So I'm going to come over to you then. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in gaming.
Yeah. I come from the background of being an avid gamer all my life. I'm born in the 1980s, and from playing on Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Mario and those fairly simple games, I've entered into the realm of tabletop gaming with the Swedish version of Dungeons and Dragons, today called Dragonbane, a little bit Dungeons and Dragons, Vampire the Masquerade and World of Darkness back in the 90s, Swedish game Cult, Divinity Lost, and then sort of fell out of the gaming circuit a little bit for better part of 10 years. Becoming a media scholar, it sort of always was there at the back of my mind, like media and storytelling and narratives and representation and semiotics is interesting. But gaming was always in the back of my mind as something similar but still different. So it was always like an itch on finding the proper ways to approach it and analyze it in a way that sort of do it justice, because it is all that kind of representation and storytelling and narratives, but still you have to treat it differently. And it wasn't until some years ago that I sort of got an opportunity to actually start working on it as a scholar, and it is a fascinating topic to discuss.
It's certainly fascinating. And what do you think makes that difference with gaming versus other media? Is it the interactive dimension of it that makes it different?
In one word, agency.
Okay.
Because it is not something that you as a player can do passively. You have to contribute, you have to be active, you have to be immersed, you have to be an active part of it. And the way that you play the game will affect your experience and the emergent narrative, the emergent story. And that is, in my opinion, the major difference. Now, I am as a tabletop gamer exceptionally colored by the fact that in tabletop role playing you have complete control, or at least you have control over your own agency, and the entire gaming experience is shaped in collaboration with the other players. That is the main difference in terms of video games, where the game provides affordances as structures. But in general, I would say agency.
That's interesting. So if I understand you correctly, you have some kind of, you shape the outcome. It's not fixed. It's not as determined. It's not as predetermined. It kind of evolves and is emergent in a way that's different.
It isn't necessarily linear.
Okay, interesting. Really, really interesting. Becky, how did you? What's your background and your interest in gaming?
So, I also, rather like Osvaldo, didn't get exposed to gaming like too much, which is ironic because that's kind of the topic of part of my research, which is my parents wouldn't let me play games, and games were not necessarily meant for me in a way, because still there is a bit of a childhood toy aisle segregation problem, I think, with games. Like, they are still a little bit more for boys than they are for girls. And but beyond that, my parents just thought, like, you shouldn't be gaming, you should be studying. And then so in Korea we say that there's a saying about something you learn late in life kind of taking over your life because you've been waiting your entire life to do it. So that's what happened when I sort of entered a relationship with my current husband, which is he was a gamer, and I just sort of, he was like, do you want to play? And I was like, yes. I want to play all the games, and so every single game you have, I will play it, because I've always wanted to get more into games. I wanted more than Super Mario. I wanted more than the tiny Game Boy that I was allowed as a child. So since I was like about 22, it's been kind of nonstop. And then eventually I turned it into research because I felt guilt at how much time I was spending on it. And so when people ask me like, oh, your project after your dissertation, my dissertation was on film policy in colonial Korea, they were like, this gaming thing is really different from your dissertation research. What's behind that? And I was like, oh, procrastination. The 4 years of procrastination. I was procrastinating on my dissertation by flirting and having an affair in a way with gaming. And I specifically got into playing and watching gaming in a competitive way. So competitive gaming is called esports. And it's a pretty well-established industry, I think, at this point. It's PC gaming in particular, in its current form, has existed for over 20 years. And South Korea has kind of been a mecca of it for a variety of infrastructural reasons. And so my current research is very much about resituating and recentering the physical body and physical space in how we talk about gaming.
I love that.
Because it's so easy to think of it as solitary, as disembodied. Everything's on the screen. It has nothing to do with your hands or anything. And it was very easy to think of it as sort of all just virtual. But I tell everyone I can, esports was just as impacted by the COVID pandemic. It's just as reliant on providing physical spaces for these tournaments and competitions to take place, and your physical body, and therefore your race, your gender, biological sex, all of these things do come into play. So that's kind of what I've been working on for the past few years.
So interesting. I had an opportunity to live in South Korea for 3.5 years or something. And again, I grew up not playing any sort of games. That was something my brother did, right? Like he played games. And of course, then, the room culture in Korea, whether it's a noraebang, which is a singing room, or a gaming room, and going into a gaming room for the first time ever, you realize that it is a distinctly different, my brother would play alone in his room, there was a whole culture and community there that I couldn't see. We just thought he was a loner, but actually there was a lot more going on there. But then you go to Korea where everyone is at their own screen, but it seemed to me like a very social thing where there were just loads of friends together playing, and there was ramen and coffee stations, and it was really geared up to facilitate this kind of communal gaming culture, which seemed very different. A really, really interesting and different culture there.
Yeah, and that's really so the PC pang, which pang is Korean for room. So their PC cafes are called PC rooms in Korea. Obviously I'm talking about South Korea. And the one thing I would like that's kind of the cornerstone of my research is the radical accessibility that provides. So one of my favorite anecdotes that I like to tell is there's this one guy in the online game League of Legends, which is probably the biggest esport in the world right now. His name is Lee Sang-hyuk. His game name moniker is Faker, and he's a 5-time world champion. He's won the world championship the most times of anyone. Like literally no one has won it twice. He has won it 5 times.
Wow.
And he got asked in a 2019 interview about his upbringing and like his background. And the journalist said, I read that your family was on national welfare growing up. I read that you were not well off. And he said, yeah, I mean, that's true, but that didn't have anything to do with my gaming, because I just saved up some bus fare and I went to the PC room. And that's how affordable it is. That's I just always encourage my students to compare that with the fact that to get a game capable PC setup in the US, that's bare minimum $1,500 to $2,000. Whereas PC rooms, that's $1 an hour.
Yeah.
And that's been the case for like many, many years. And that's the kind of like technological accessibility that has allowed South Korea to sort of build up a gaming community and audience. So yeah, and again, that's the physical space aspect of it.
So interesting. Now, Osvaldo, I saw your hand shoot up the second Michael said agency and the immersive power. I saw you get excited. So I'm assuming you had some thoughts on that.
Oh, I just wanted to add on what distinguishes games as media from other media. Games are complex because they include almost any other form of communication. They include images, but not still images, also moving images. They include the spoken word, but also written words. You can read text in a game on the screen. But I think the most distinctive part is processes, is conveying meaning through processes. There is a whole field of study on procedural rhetoric. Procedural rhetoric. A colleague here from Georgia Tech, or an ex-colleague from Georgia Tech, Ian Bogus, made some of the earliest and most impactful contributions to this idea that games, what distinguishes games, is that they use processes to convey meaning. And that's something that you will not find in the same way in other forms of media. And that's it's important to how we learn through games. These processes both include probably human conventions and in the way we interact, but also they are encoded in the game code. And that also add a layer to the idea of agency. We have agency, but to a certain extent, because it actually video games fight the notion of agency in ways that are tricky and not necessarily honest always, because we fail to see the ideology behind a game, because we are just playing with process and we believe that we have freedom. But at the end, those who created the game, they created the set of outcomes that are possible without that variety of possibilities. And in that sense, games are also restrictive.
Yeah.
Not only provide you with freedom
So
and agency.
would processes also be like, would rules be another way of thinking about processes?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Just to illustrate with an example, I have written on this topic of immigration, how immigration can be discussed. You can argue immigration in a paper and you use the word to present your argument. You can use a whole movie, and there are many documentaries and films on the topic of immigration to present a view favorite or against migrants. But if you gamify this, you can just, like in a game like Tropicos, for instance, you are the ruler of an island and you have an immigration system that you can decide whether you have open borders, whether you are restrictive, and that has that trigger consequences in the game world. And in that way, the gamer is not being told what to think. Our immigration is not even being moved by the consequence of decisions as you find in film, for instance, that tell you the story of poor migrants and the consequence of the hardships that they encounter. But through your decisions, trying to control an immigration system in a fictional island, you suddenly receive this learning as a byproduct of playing that. Oh, if I close my borders in this game, there is less production, and that has an impact. If I have open borders now, I have a nationalistic movement rising inside my island that is opposing me, because they say that I am selling out to foreigners. And so through those dynamics, the games encode ideology.
Yeah, just to build on it, you can even backtrack even further, that saying that playing a game is basically constructing a different reality. Best specified by the child who says to their parent, "Mom, you're not playing for real," because if you do not participate and treat the game as something that is real in some kind of an ontological sense, the game falls apart. So it in playing itself is the built-in idea that we have to accept that the game is important. Regardless if we're talking about 22 people hunting a ball for 90 minutes, which is on some kind of level kind of ridiculous, but it is an industry that is pushing and generating millions and millions and millions of euros, dollars. There are copious amounts of money involved in it, only because enough of us treat it as important or valid, or and every time we say, I don't want to play anymore, or this game is silly, I'm gonna walk away, it kind of falls apart.
That's fascinating. So if I hear the two of you correctly, on the one hand, I mean, games, they allow for agency, they allow you to make some decisions, but these decisions have kind of limits, right? Because coders have created a universe, and the actual creating of this universe has some ideologies and ideas instilled in it, right? What is permitted, what is not permitted, whether they intended it or not, it belies some of their thoughts, their ideas about how the world that they've created should or should not function. And then on the other hand, in order for this to function, the players have to accept this reality. They have to go along with the game as it was and accept the rules of playing. And this makes it sound like improv to me. The same thing with improv. If you don't yes and the offer someone is giving you, it falls apart. You have to say yes to what the developer is offering you and build on it, in effect, if I understand correctly.
Probably a perfect analogy, actually.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome, Gaming Universe. Becky?
I guess just as an addendum to all of this, I feel like there's actually some really productive, and maybe there's writing already on this, and I'm just not read up enough, but I feel like there's some really productive analogous qualities between gaming and theater, in that I often feel like when I'm playing role-playing games, first-person type games, where yes, I do make choices, and yes, they can have consequences. I still have to kind of go through motions, so to speak, and I still have to say lines and get to certain checkpoints, and that all feels quite theatrical. That all feels like I'm on a stage, kind of going through the motions that have been blocked, and there's certain stage directions. And I think, but I don't know. Personally, I haven't actually seen a ton of comparisons on that level. There's a lot of like great literary analysis on game narratives. But yeah, I was actually wondering if anyone knew any research on that.
Yeah, I think that the comparison between theatre, because theatre is a lot more structured. I feel like theatre and a novel are closer to one another, whereas gaming and improv are close to one another. Because improv is also open. Improv is, there are rules to improv. It's very much a game, but it's a generative game. Actually, I did improv in Seoul. It was very, very fun. That's my fun tidbit from South Korea. Okay, so taking a step back, I think you guys have given me some tenets of what constitutes a game. So on the one hand, there needs to be room to make decisions and for the end point to not be determined, right? So there is agency, but it's limited agency. You have to have players, people who are willing to play. I'm guessing it needs to be fun. Is fun an essence of what makes gaming a game, or is that too simplistic?
Actually my quote might be useful here, because I brought a quote from old German phenomenologist called Eugene Fink, who was a student of Husserl and Heidegger back in the 30s and 40s, who primarily in German wrote quite a lot of the phenomenology of play in terms of Spiel. And he basically suggests that the purpose of playing is playing itself. It is its own reward, in a sense. And my quote is put like this: playing does not simply occur in our life like the vegetative processes. It is always a sensibly illuminated occurrence, a performance that is experienced. And we live in enjoyment of the act of play, which, mind you, presupposes no reflexive self-consciousness. In many cases of intense abandonment to play, we are far removed from any reflection, and yet all play is maintained in a comprehensive self-association of human life. So basically what he suggests is that playing is always both situated in the real world, but it also kind of constitutes its own reality, and it is its own reward. And that is something that puts play as an activity, as a process. It makes it distinct from any other aspect of life, basically.
So perhaps instead of saying it's fun, I should have said play is a key element of gaming. And now, of course, I can't help but pick up on the last lines of that quote that said human life, because as the Animal Studies podcast, play has come up a lot on the show as something that animals do. Animals play. a lot. So do they have games? I think there's certainly a lot of evidence that they do. Dolphins create these rings where they shoot through. And so the animal world, irrespective of humans' engagement with them, have crafted and created games. So there's obviously some sort of evolutionary importance and significance to playing and possibly even gaming, even though I don't want to conflate gaming and play here.
Well, I will say first that games are fun until you turn them into your subject of research. As soon as you do most of the fun.
Unless you play Monopoly with my sister, because I think Monopoly has proven to like the non-fun game. Everyone starts out.
That too. Well, I actually playing gaming implies a lot of frustration, precisely because of the level of difficulty that developers basically decide to add to that. You can be really, really mad and frustrated while playing certain games. So. But I think the playful part is at the foundation. Again, I share with you earlier quotation. I don't think I have read in the many windows in my computer to read it textually, but it's basically the opening segments or paragraphs of within a classic study on the Homo ludens. He uses this still male-centered language in his time. You know, he speaks of men think, men do. He's trying to refer to all humanity, but you know, acknowledge that limitation in the way he speaks, which is epochal. He describes play as something at the foundation of not only humans but also mammals, as something that we share. And in that sense, gaming is a structure, cultural derivation of our playful nature. And so playing is more spontaneous. It's something that we don't need to plan. You know, we get playful in a second. We play with words in the way we communicate. We play with gestures. We play in many ways, you know, in many contexts. And but once we try to turn that into a structure experience with rules and roles and outcomes, then we are moving into the realm of gaming. And in that sense, I as I said, I don't know much about research on animals showing how this takes place. But as you mentioned, I bet while conducting this podcast, the subject has been brought up many times because it's essentially part of the human, part of the animal experience as we witness it, at least.
Yeah, you'll be interested. I mean, I find it really helpful to think about how play can become gaming, right? So play, you can have kind of spontaneous play, but it becomes a game once there's more structure. And I think, again, looking at there's been a fair bit of research that's been done on animals like wolves, for example, where there is some structure to the play. There are rules to the play. Or you watch dogs in dog parks. Alexander Horowitz has done painstaking work to try and understand the rules of their play. So, for example, she recorded videos of dogs playing in parks to figure out how they initiated play and what the rules were for the limits of play. And she slowed it down to frame by frame because it's happening at a speed that's faster than we can process, in effect. And what she found was there are all of these really complex things going on. So everyone knows the play bow, which is an offer to play. But then if a dog who is playing with a fellow dog loses interest, they do all these sorts of interesting moves, like bumping each other's bums to one another or barking. These like attention getters. If I can get this one's attention, I can get them to play with me. But also if someone's getting too rough. So if another dog happens to get a little bit too rough, a yelp can quickly stop everything and you'll watch both dogs stand and wait until, can we play again? Is everyone okay? So there are these mechanisms at play that seem to be facilitating some form of game. And of course, then there are loads of examples of animals in research being trained how to play games, which I'd love to talk to you more about. I watched a video just before this, actually, of how zoos are using iPads now with like fish moving and stuff as means of enrichment for animals, because they're so understimulated in zoo settings. So they put up these games, and now they're realizing that this is a very effective way to understand their cognitive abilities, but also to offer them some form of stimulation, which is really interesting. Becky?
So, and I was also thinking that with animal play, and granted, I feel like the only direct experience I have with it is playing with my cats, my 3 cats. But it feels very much about like there's the euphoria of movement itself. And weirdly, the way I relate to that is, again, like, yes, gaming is video gaming is a fairly stationary activity and overall, but anyone who's sort of had to deal with a tough boss fight in any game will know at the end when you've won and your hands are shaking because you've been gripping the controller so tight and you've been trying to manipulate those controls very precisely. That itself, I think there's a euphoric quality to it. I think the physicality and that there. I think the joy of the movement, however minor seeming, is actually a commonality there. Like there's a French professional gamer whose gamer tag is NicoGDH. And I was looking into what is that? Because I know his name is Nico, but what's the GDH? And it stands for God Hand, because he was so adept at pressing controls so quickly and so accurately that his account was initially banned for cheating. And he actually had to demonstrate in front of it with a camera on his hands to show the game developer team, no, I actually do press the keys that fast. I am actually that good. And once the ban was lifted, then he became NicoGDH. He formally changed his gamer tag to that. So there's a sort of, it's an achievement thing as well, which weirdly makes me think of like, those dog performance competitions where they have to do those obstacles. Like it reminds me of that a little bit. The fine motor skills, and the training and the euphoria of that kind of play. Yeah.
Question, because I only know about the Swedish professional esports player, that several of them, in particular a professional gamer called Madelisk, who's a StarCraft champion, who is also a CrossFit champion. Basically recognizing that the physicality is immense, so she felt that she was required to be in top physical shape. And I do believe that the Swedish team Ninjas in Pyjamas is also having a very strict physical regimen so that they are able to work like that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think all of this is coming in the aftermath of realizing that the training regimen for a lot of esports players has been really unhealthy because they game for hours on end and that's their training. It's literally like 12, 14 hours a day on some days, many days, I'm sure. So everyone has perpetual like hunched back. Everyone has perpetual like wrist problems. So that's a more recent development, I want to say. The idea that no, maybe you should get up from your desk and stretch. Maybe you should go work out your core a bit. Maybe some yoga would be good for you. And maybe no more ramen.
Sacrilege.
I know. But I do think the past, gosh, actually, like maybe within the past decade, we've seen some shifts in that direction, which is definitely a good thing.
I really appreciate your kind of observation about movement, though, because I do think we equate gaming with lack of movements, but it all depends. And like now again, thinking about Foucault, I can't help because he has this really famous quote where he talks about discipline, and discipline is actually about having kind of key movements in space, actually really having disciplined movements. So gaming is a very kind of disciplined kind of movement of, you look at a sniper who's very skilled at sniping in real world, like there's physical strength involved in that, but there's a lot of fine motor skills that are also kind of involved in having that happen. And of course, it's the physical body that's needing to move, but there's movement in the game as well. And I think this takes us back to that idea of agency and storytelling. There's movement in terms of how stories are developing. But I mean, you guys know better than me. I think it's probably fairly rare for things to stand still in a game, right? Like, surely bodies are always moving. Even in the virtual realm, movement is a key aspect of gaming.
They're all sort of games in that sense. And there is I remember my first console was a Wii by Nintendo that included a balance board in which you stand and it would read your body and how you're balancing on the body. And you could do aerobics on that. You could do yoga. And there was also a bar. It was one of the first waves of this type of gaming, trying to gamify sports. A bar on top of the TV that would read your body in a space, and a controller that you were moving with your hand. I forgot the names for this. I don't remember basically how this technology was referred to. And I play a lot of tennis. I remember being in and ping pong. Being in a winter in Pennsylvania as a Caribbean, for me, a winter in Pennsylvania was something extremely insulting, and I didn't want to leave the home. And I would spend days during the weekend just playing ping pong in front of the TV, and it felt very engaged in terms of the physicality of it, the tracking of your hits of the ball in a space, and the ability to score and feel that you were actually playing was pretty good. It didn't. I don't think that really led to further development of this form of gaming, as some thought. In augmented reality gaming with headsets, there have been a little bit more of this, but I haven't played those games. I know one that is a guitar airplay. It's like a rock band, that type of rock band play where you play, pretend that you're playing, you're in a concert, but it's with a headset like the Oculus, and you are inside the headset in the stage playing, and you don't even use a controller. Your hands are tracked in the air while you solo and play the music. So
well, this is where I think there's a lot of potential with gaming and thinking about animals, right? So, I mean, I'm not a big fan of zoos. I will say that right now, right? Like, I think zoos are not a great place to get to know animals because animals are kept in very captive environments, and it's not an quote unquote a natural environment, right? Like, any observation or kind of appreciation of animals in that space is done in a very controlled space, / also labs, right? Any trying to understand of animals in a lab space, the scientific understanding there is dubious at best because you're always whittling it down to a very specific type of thing. So you've got things like behavioral ecology that go out to try and understand animals in their environments, et cetera, et cetera. But I really think that like VR and virtual reality offers this really incredible way, one, to think about things like history. Osvaldo, I know you look at history, like being immersed in, the French Revolution. I feel like children would be like, wow, I really remember what went on in the French Revolution. Or being immersed in, a pride of lions as they're going for a hunt, or a herd of cows. I think it would allow for a different kind of appreciation of those animal realities. But perhaps I'm off. Like, maybe games do this already. Games already have animal worlds. And do people empathize with animals in these spaces? Or I don't know. What's your feeling? Have you, as people who have not thought about animals, have you ever really played a game and thought, wow, animals, like, I don't want to shoot that animal? Or are they just like objects in these games and there's not much in the way of thought?
So I will say, I don't think there's a ton of games out there that put a real thoughtful amount of effort into representing animals and fostering a relationship between the player and the endgame animals. However, I guess the example, as you were describing, sort of the potential, what popped into my mind was a game that it came out some years ago, but it's still like legendary. It's Red Dead Redemption 2. And the name is not promising, I know. But it's a cowboy game. You play as
Great game.
an outlaw. Yeah, amazing game. And there's an entire narrative in there about the U.S. government and treatment of Native Americans and their environs, their livelihoods, their relationship with local wildlife. And yes, the game does have an incentive to hunt, and you get lots of different kinds of rifles with which you can hunt, and there's all these different achievements. But also, there is such a beauty. They have animated that game so beautifully that it is 100% possible to just walk around, pick herbs, pick wild carrots, and observe a moose, and just observe the wildlife that used to exist in the quote-unquote Wild West. And that's, you know, there's the agency, right? If you want to be a hunter, you can. But that's one of those games that I think legitimately allows you to just get lost in the beauty of it. So I would like to see more of it. But I will also say those are the games that are really resource intensive to animate, to engineer. And that's a kind of another part of this entire conversation, maybe. Yeah.
The materiality of gaming, certainly. Michael?
Two things. First of all, the term or the concept immersion has popped up every once in a while, and this is really important in terms of gaming, or both play and gaming. The ability to sort of get lost in the experience in itself. And Red Dead Redemption Red Dead Redemption 2 is a very beautiful example of the game designers really working really hard to allow the player to just explore the environment, and it is a beautiful game. While also, in my opinion, it is kind of interesting because it actually sets up a subquest on trying to find a group of hunters who basically kill for the joy of it, which puts this beautiful mirror up towards the player, who sometimes do that kind of play style, basically just walking around in tabletop RPG. There is the term of the murderous hobo, somebody who just randomly walks around killing everything on sight, because essentially you can, because there is no consequence. But what RDR2 does with this particular subquest is they're actually scalding that kind of play style, which is beautiful. Basically, and I if I remember correctly, there is this moral mechanic which punishes you for as a player if you go on these essential killing streaks in terms of hunting buffalo, for example, or deer or something like that. Basically collecting too much loot that you don't really need.
Wow.
Just mindless killing.
This reminds me of what Osvaldo was saying, that kind of there are objectives and ideologies built into the kind of creating and crafting of the game. And even as you were speaking there, the kind of immersion, again, this is not a gaming reference, but a TV reference, it immediately makes me think of Westworld, right? Because spoilers, anyone who hasn't watched Westworld, spoilers, pause your thing now. But Westworld, you watch it, you think everything is real. And of course, the big reveal comes that this is an immersive gaming experience. And this is really like, it raises all of these ethical questions of, if the characters can feel all of the violence that happens in there, should we be, thinking about, does how you play a game influence your morality outside of the game? So if you're very violent, and again, as someone outside of the gaming community, people hear of games, there's lots of violence and this is bad for society because it leads to loads of violence. And I know that this has been debunked by gaming communities that have shown that isn't as equal, as easily transferable, right? It's not like if you're in Grand Theft Auto and you're shooting all the time that you become someone who shoots, right? It's not that easily deduced. But what about this connection between gaming and violence. Have you guys got thoughts on that?
It's interesting, Claudia, you brought up Westworld. I believe there is a connection between Red Dead Redemption and Westworld. And actually, while watching the TV show, I always wonder if the script writers had played the game. I think, well, first, in terms of animals in games and how they are represented, there are conventions and pretty hackneyed conventions for that. Animals, there is usually many games like open worlds, like the one we have been talking about, open worlds like Red Dead Redemption 1 or 2. There is crafting systems where players get to craft tools to advance in the game, and usually the resources that you need for that are natural resources. So you need to hunt animals to that end. So there is a part, and in most open world games you find a version of that. There is also the pure pleasure, aesthetic pleasure of contemplating nature, as Becky was mentioning. I'm a big Assassin's Creed player because of the historical regret of the French Revolution, as you mentioned earlier in Unity. Havana, I'm from Havana, and I play Havana and the Caribbean islands in Black Flag, and it was amazing. I really enjoyed that, talking about having a fun experience while playing a game. And they introduce at some points petting systems, something as simple as that. You see an animal and you have a button you press and you can pet that animal. And a cat, a kitty, something like that. That's it. And they introduced that because players found reward in such a simple action. And there are other ways in which you can interact also with animals. In Black Flag, you're in the Caribbean waters and suddenly you are warned that a whale is going to come out of the water and jump. So that you prepare your camera just to watch that scenery. It's like a scenic moment, touristic scenic moment. At the same token, if you want them to stop there, you're cheap. To hunt the whale, you can do that. And whale hunting is one of the things that environmentalists have been the most opposed to for a long time for good reasons. So the game had a lot of backlash immediately by those folks who don't play necessarily the game, but learn through third hand that what the game is presenting to players, to gamers, and they tend to, these activists usually tend to establish that causality between playing something and enacting it in real life, which, as you mentioned, is more complex than that. Games have ethics built in, but those ethics don't necessarily mirror real life ethics. They can actually play with the idea that you do in games exactly what you are not allowed in real life. As you mentioned with Grand Theft Auto, it's all about stealing cars, driving poorly, provoking accidents, shooting people, running from the cops. It's everything, it's a free card for the time that you're playing game that. And so games have their own ethics system. They can encourage values, and I believe that games, and that's why I care about representation. Most games are produced by white male developers. I think that's a big problem, at least in the Western world. Most games are produced by white game developers. We're playing the fantasies of white male. And that's why you find that Latinos are so poorly represented, that women are so poorly represented, tokenized, hypersexualized, and all that have to do with the fantasies of a certain group of people that play the game. And I think games can ethically offer a better portrayals of people in society, so that there is a fictional world that better present different cultures, and that extends to animal, in my view. So striking a good balance between the freedom that games give you, the free card to do things that you cannot do in the real world, and enjoying doing that as a playful moment. But at the same time, the responsibility that if you are offering a portrayal of the real world that has implications, in how we perceive our society, I think that's something the industry should try to strive to accomplish, that good balance.
Gosh, you said so many important things there. I mean, what really stood out for me was one, the idea that there are natural resources. And I'm just curious how often animals are these natural resources in these games, because that's often
Very
reflective, right? It's reflective,
often.
as you said, of our own values with regards to how animals sit in our structures. But really powerful what you were saying there with regards to the ethical quandaries. I think that games, one, they could prompt reflection on. So just because you're doing something violent doesn't mean that it becomes that. It might even actually be an opportunity for subversion, for thinking about what these actions mean in broader society. But also the industry dynamics of who makes the games, who makes the rules, and how you said they. I mean, again, not to say that all white men have the same fantasy, right? It's not like, depending on where you come from or how, but they're, to take your point, where are games being developed? So Becky, loads of gaming coming from South Korea, right? Loads of people that are South Korean gamers, etc. A big K-pop music scene, big film scene in Korea. Is there also a big gaming developing scene? Are we seeing something about South Koreans' fantasies emerging?
Yes, I mean, and to Osvaldo's point, just as game development is sort of predominantly occupied by, it seems, a lot of, like, I think there's more diversity now for sure than there was, but it's still sort of probably more majority white male. And similarly in South Korea, like I'm sure people have read about like the anti-feminist backlash still ongoing. And sort of one of the first signs that really rang alarm bells for me of that backlash was like around 2017, 2018, when I started seeing male gamers who wanted to ensure that, male Korean gamers who wanted to ensure that the games being developed in Korea were for them. And to that end, they would sort of try and route out or try to pressure gaming companies to push out female developers, female designers, which is so troubling.
So sorry, if I understand you correctly, these are people that are resistant against maybe Western development, but they also don't want women involved in it, or is this just
not Western development? They don't want the games being made in Korea, the games being made by Korean companies, which are the companies they can pressure, the ones that they can kind of harass on social media or whatever. They didn't want those games to cater to anyone except them, the male audience.
Interesting. Okay. And what, like, any reasoning? What's the justification or reasoning for that?
I mean, it's very much sort of everything that we see right now. It's sort of that knee-jerk, anti-woke, sort of quote-unquote woke, whatever they decide is woke, sort of anti-representation, anti-diversity, anti-feminist kind of impulses. And I don't want to like generalize about the kind of people who were involved in those kind of pressures. I'm assuming plenty of young men were involved, but really it's about the fact that there's a perceived threat. There's a perceived sense that that power is slipping through their fingers. And whatever the exact details of which, is whatever is in their heads, really, in my opinion, whether that's social power, political power, representation. And I think gaming was a way that frustration or feeling of being threatened was channeled. But I also wanted to add to everything Osvaldo said, which I really agree with. Also, big Assassin's Creed fan. Sure. I want to say that in addition to these ways in which games can provoke thought and make us reflect, I think one of the most important things is how cleverly it can incentivize us towards certain behavior. The main example I like to talk about with this is a game called Disco Elysium, where you play as, it sounds unhinged when I say it out loud, where you play as this kind of life in shambles police detective who has been tasked with investigating a murder that happened in the backyard of a hotel. But he also went on like a 3-day alcoholic bender, and he has like some significant memory loss. And the game starts when you wake up. and you have to basically figure out, like, you're just kind of stumbling through the world, figure out who you are, what your name is. And the game takes place over about 3 days in the game time. And you realize as you're playing the game that your choices and thoughts are kind of really sharply affected by this person who has become your investigation partner. It's another police officer called Kim Kitsuragi, who just kind of shows up and says, obviously, we have to go on with the investigation. He's kind of French. The entire game is kind of French. And you sort of form a relationship with him, and through your conversations with him, you just kind of end up relying on him a lot. And he's initially very skeptical of you, and he thinks you're, a bag of like rags, basically. You're falling apart at the seams, but also he's developing respect for you, and you realize you don't want to disappoint him. That becomes like, and this is a commonality I've found with all my friends who play this game. Disappointing Kim is absolutely the worst thing you could do in this game. One of my friends literally quit the game and restarted it because she accidentally picked a dialogue option that she didn't realize was going to do this, but you accidentally call Kim a racist slur because he's of kind of Asian origin. And it upsets him so much that he leaves you for like a little bit. And it upset my friend so much, she quit the game and restarted it from the last save point because she was so horrified. And that relationship with Kim guides you to essentially be a better person. Essentially be a good person weaving your way through this unfamiliar world. And at the end of the game, but also kind of push back on Kim and his sort of fairly standard beliefs. And at the end, the reason I think this game is actually a really interesting topic specifically for our conversation is one of the most important conversations in the game is at the end, where you run into a cryptid, a mythical kind of creature that a lot of people assume doesn't exist, but a few people do believe exists. And that is one of the most transcendental conversations you can have in that game. And and Kim is next to you, completely flabbergasted because he was pretty positive this thing didn't exist. Anyway, that was a lot of words about how important the incentivization structure of gaming is, in my opinion.
No, but I think this really speaks to the idea of how ethics can play out, right? And like Michael, you mentioned earlier the forget what word you used, but for that like murderous renegade who just wants to kill, murderous hobo. And how there are different rewards and punishments built into these systems to kind of expand a different moral universe. Now, Michael, I know this is something you've written about with regards to The Witcher, kind of who's included in the moral circle or not, and how gaming can afford you opportunities to think morally about different characters or different figures. I hope I've characterized that properly.
Yeah,
Maybe you've got some thoughts here.
With all honesty, you can play as a murderous hobo even within The Witcher, because it is an open sandbox. It allows you as a player to play a certain style during a play session, and that is one of the beauties about gaming. But for many different reasons, I think that The Witcher is an interesting topic, or an interesting game, or rather an interesting franchise. In particular now, just a couple of weeks ago, because Witcher is, in a way, it is a linear sandbox, but it's also a highly structurized, almost linear. If I was a tabletop gamer, I would say railroaded game, because it provides you some kind of choice, but it's essentially you're going down one path, and then at key points, choices you make will take you down different tracks or conjunctions.
So this is very different to the Red Redemption 2 that you're speaking about, where I can just like wander around and be like, oh, flowers, and I can make up my own mind about pretty much anything.
It is a sandbox, but the main narrative that sort of structures or creates momentum is basically a railroad.
Okay, I'm with you.
And a play session can sort of switch in between just free roaming, where you go and explore, kill some animals, pick some herbs, do some business, buy stuff, sell stuff, find stuff, or engage with the narrative quests. But now, just a couple of weeks ago, the developer Project CD Red was released a trailer for the 4th installment of the next Witcher game, which will feature a female protagonist. Ciri will be the player protagonist, and it caused, shall we say, a little bit of ruckus among the gaming community, who of course couldn't really accept that now we have to play as a female protagonist.
You have to, so you can't choose Geralt, or so she's the main. You have
Geralt
to
is
play as her.
retired.
Who's been playing The Witcher
Happening a lot
or
right
read
now.
any of the Witcher stories, like anyone who's actually a Witcher player, in my opinion, knows that that is the logical next step, because I literally retired Geralt in Witcher 3 to a vineyard with his lady love. Like, he is done with being a Witcher. That was literally the formal canonical ending to that game.
Well, now I know. Now I
and
know.
also,
Thanks,
like,
Becky. Now I know.
sorry. But so that's like my soapbox. Like I strongly feel that a lot of the criticism is coming from knee-jerk reactionary kind of people who haven't actually even played or appreciated the narrative, and also kind of overlooks one of the most important parts of Witcher 3's gaming mechanic, which is there's a parenting sim in there. It's about how good a father figure you are to Ciri, in that how much do you allow space for her choices? How much do you allow her to speak out and like voice her opinions? Because it is very possible in that game to just talk over her and to make her decisions for her. And kind of basically, as the story goes on, it is possible to make her smaller and smaller and less certain. And that affects her and the ending of the game. But if you are a good parent, father figure, you're not actually her father, but if you're a good father figure to her, she eventually grows into a person who can take on the mantle.
And the mantle is big and powerful, baddie. Or is this a crowd? Remember, you're speaking to someone who's watched the show but has no idea. So I am not a gamer. I just know, again, I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but I just know Ciri is powerful, very powerful, and
very powerful.
And
yes.
I'm sorry, this must be so frustrating to you, talking to someone who's like, yeah, I don't, what do you mean by mantle?
No, it's important to always for me to keep in mind. Basically, for her to choose her own path in life, and basically, if you get the good ending of the game, she becomes a Witcher at the end of the third game, and she chooses her own trajectory.
Fascinating.
This is happening a whole lot right now with the anti-war culture in the gaming community. It's the same with the last release of Assassin's Creed Shadows set in Japan. They decided to include this time a black samurai, which is based actually on a character from it's been remediated from previous storytelling around this character. But since it's not the traditional Japanese samurai, and the other character you can play is a female ninja. I haven't played the game. It's yours. I'm not sure it even came out already, because Ubisoft usually does a fall release for this, and they decided to postpone it till February to this month because of all the backlash that the game was getting. And it got very ugly online. You could see people posting memes, anti-black memes, basically comparing the main protagonist to all the racist ugly tropes that we know about. I will not go into details about that. And a lot of discussion about this phenomenon. The strongest voices were coming from this anti-war community, trying to even sabotage the release of the game. I'm linking this to a potential bankruptcy by Ubisoft and the end of the company.
So, I mean, it's clear based on, several of your guys' comments here today that gaming isn't that inclusive in terms of who's getting to make a decision with regards to who is represented, or at least people have very strong opinions. But on the other hand, I guess I'm just trying to marry in my mind, and of course this isn't a black and white or this or that kind of comparison. But on the one hand, you've got, and I think Osvaldo, you mentioned this in our email communications, you've got representations in games where now we're talking about the representation of women, the representation of black people, potentially even the representation of animals, and how very politicized and opinionated this can become. And then we've also got, on the other hand, the kind of gaming experience. So you can even have people who aren't gamers having really strong opinions about who's represented in these games and not. So that's happening in terms of the representation, which is important. It's important to have other figures represented, right? So like the feminist movement did a great deal to show how I've never had as many goosebumps as I had watching the opening scene to Wonder Woman. Like seeing a bunch of women just like slash shit up and I was like, yes. And only then did I realize how growing up, I didn't have, women who were just badasses. Like they were just badass. And I guess gaming offers a really great space to kind of create these representative moments where people can see difference in a really important way. But that said, it's not to say that everyone would necessarily pick their own representation. So that me as a woman, I would choose to play a woman necessarily, because as you said earlier, the gaming world is a world in which I can fantasize something else or be something else. So yeah, it's kind of tricky to think across these two realms.
If I can say something actually about the paper for the because I believe this podcast is part, as you have mentioned, of the event that we're organizing here at Tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will be presenting on a video game specifically on the Haitian Revolution. And part of my research for that was looking at how players of any race, but in particularly, of course, I found the most interesting in Afro-American players and Black players, how they show their walk through the game and commented on it in real time. So they were screencasting their gameplay. They were recording their gameplay and showing it. And you could clearly see how important was for these Afro-American players and Black players to be embodying a Black Trinidadian ex-slave who is now an assassin, but he's in Haiti, fighting in favor of the Maroon movement to free slaves. And when they engaged in a fight and they defeated the overseer and they managed to free the slaves, the emotion was like nothing else in any other combat interaction that may have had. It was charged with meaning because it was not just playing, and having fun. And they would comment on that very, very, very explicitly. I could see other white players, and it was more the gameplay experience. Some of them would show that they care about freeing as many slaves as possible, but they were in the plantations and trying to kill all the overseers and free the slaves. But it was particularly visceral when those players identify with the situation because they were part of the Afro-American community. So because of what we have said about gaming, that is the agency that can provide the ability to simulate real life scenarios to allow you to relive things that are meaningful to you or experience things that people have told you, but you have never experienced in the way that a game immersion can provide. All that adds a whole important dimension in terms of how game are built, that people actually that what is being presented in games gives a voice to as many communities as possible.
And of course, I mean, this is really, it's about giving a voice and perhaps also trying to, as you were speaking about, empathize. And I know that what I'm saying now is going to be really, really tricky, but sometimes also being able to take on a character that's not you. So a white person taking on a non-white character, which in some circles would be seen as kind of really problematic. But I actually think it's a really powerful move to try and think through, as you mentioned earlier, the kind of immigrant migration game, or having the island and trying to manage immigration. You start to realize the complexity of it in taking on a different role or a different function. You can maybe appreciate on the one hand, you've got folks who can really appreciate that they're represented and that their histories and lineages are taken seriously, and that but on the other hand, you've got people that might also be able to appreciate that it's not just a game. Actually, it's much more complicated than that. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think we would talk forever and ever. I'd like to bring us back to animals just for a moment, if I may. And then, Becky, I think you haven't said your quote yet. So Michael and Osvaldo have both mentioned their quotes. I'll give you an opportunity to say yours. With everything we've said about gaming, and gaming culture and kind of the tension between representation and playing. And this includes things like violence, but also identity, the types of experiences that gaming can afford. Is it worthwhile to even have a conversation about the relationship between games and animals? I mean, we haven't really focused much on animals over the course of today's episode. So what is the gaming and games are one of the most sold media in the world, most experienced. So what are the potentials here for thinking about human animal relationships?
I mean, in a way, I think to start to ask critical questions about the role that animals play in a lot of games. Not all games, but in a lot of games, in the sense that they often play the role as the monster. The thing that needs to either be domesticated, something wild, or something that simply is there to be killed. Which is also one of the aspects that's very prevalent in The Witcher, which is there is almost a civilization critique or a critique of modernity there, that human actions need to push out the fantastical elements, which means that in order for society to progress, the fantastical elements has to be eliminated, either domesticated or slain. And quite a few quests within the Witcher franchise kind of address this, basically turning it into questions of what is the relationship between humans and nature, and how can we explore and provide or find alternatives to just slaying or domesticating the wild. And this is also one of the things where I think that there is an opportunity to keep on developing the big AAA franchises in order to sort of find the kind of middle way, because by tradition in video games in particular, monsters or animals are there to either be slain or run away from. And to sort of start designing games that allow for something else, would also be able to explore stories or narratives where you can choose or have the kind of agency as a player to find something in between.
And I'm guessing there are games that exist when you can be an animal, when you can take on an animal avatar of sorts. So my question then would be, how humanoid are these animals, or to what extent would the avatar actually, if you're taking on a turtle, is actually thinking about turtle physiology and needs and desires? I would assume like developers really do a lot of research in the kind of making of this. So I would hope that there's a fair deal of learning that could happen with regards to animals. Someone told me about a game called Dave the Diver that does, the guy goes and he does, and Hera was on the Animal Highlights, and he drew this incredible parallel where Dave stops to help a sea turtle who's swallowed a plastic bag, and he's like, we got to do something about pollution. And there's this whole lesson about pollution as Dave, because it's killing all the sea animals, as Dave is swimming away with like a pocket full of fish to go and feed in his dead fish to have in the sushi restaurant, which I was just grossed out by that already. Like, the fish have been dead for a while. Anyway, that's another story. So I imagine that there are also avatar opportunities. So there's changing the narrative, perhaps seeing how animals can become more genteel in stories, but also perhaps how avatars can be used to help us think more.
I will mention a couple of ideas that come to my head. One, there are games, but there is also the game mechanic aspect that can be used with educational purposes. And there is environmental piece, and you can definitely use games to try to promote environmental awareness and a more educated population in that regard. The Sims, the franchise, The Sims, I bet you guys, if you have not played, at least you're aware, God view perspective on things, controlling a world and the citizens, basically the Sims of your city, has a version that is based on environmental issues, in which the decisions you make can increase the pollution in the city or not, can make the city healthier and the citizens in that city. So you can use gaming elements to educate, basically, in this sense. Locative games based on location, particularly augmented reality games, mobile games where people go to nature and they interact with some sort of digital artifact, like in Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go has been criticized because the intention was precisely to make people walk, to make people, to reward people for exercising, at least being more mobile, to bring people to natural areas, actually, where they interact with these fictional Pokemon characters. But at the same time, when you see what you can do with the Pokemons, you can capture them, train them, you put them in fights, use them for fighting. So it's not the ideal in that sense, the type of models that embedded in the Pokemon game. But the intention is a legitimate intention in terms of trying to combine the real world with the fictional narrative created by the game. The sample provided by Pokemon can be used for other purposes. You can even use the camera, the capacity of identifying things in nature, to be a leaves collector, to identify the trees and the vegetation in an area, using the camera to help you do that, to learn about these ecosystems. In the past, I have created application with the students based on that principle. Let's try to create an app in which each of us learn about a bird in a certain ecosystem. We did this in the Galapagos Island once, and to curate the aviary life in the Galapagos to visitors, and you will learn about these species. We'll take pictures, we'll create entries, and we'll compile everything in an app so that future visitors can interact with nature and learn about it through this digital artifact. And there is always an interactive gaming element into it, or you can add it. So in that sense, I see a lot of potential for educational purposes in game design.
Yeah, I mean, it also sounds to me, though, that there almost needs to be a little bit of a philosophical intervention, though, when it comes to thinking about animals and their roles in gaming. Because even, like you said at the start, the ways in which animals seem to make an appearance is they're domesticated, they're trained, they're killed. So what kind of more, the representation that seems to be missing here, and I'm not saying that these should not be, again, taking into account the idea of being able to play with different things, but it seems that the idea of befriending or working with or dismantling the training activity doesn't seem to feature. It's just a given that animals would be used in this way, and the extent to which mainstream gaming includes an option to, because petting, you mentioned petting earlier, this is also a very diminutive type of relationship, but the extent to which you could be a vegan gamer, right, is very limited. If you want to play the game, you're going to have to use animals at some point in the. So it feels like there needs to be some sort of philosophical intervention there. But I hear you in terms of learning about biology. This might be really useful, but that could also lead to a different kind of consumptive element, right? Where we're gaming to take things from animals instead of really thinking about our relationships with animals. You're never going to win. It's tricky, but it definitely sounds like there's some work to be done.
So I actually precisely wanted to highlight a couple instances I can think of that have, in my opinion, that certain philosophical turns that I think are really needed. The first is a game called Death Stranding, where, first of all, it's pretty different from a lot of different other video games, because in that game, killing other people is actually a really dangerous thing to do. And actually, you can't do it. Like, dead bodies are actually really, really dangerous. And death itself, like just the concept of death, is quite dangerous. And also being outside is dangerous. Everything's super dangerous. And
it's
because
like an
rain,
anxiety-inducing game.
yeah, no, it's really, really an anxious game. And rain can harm you. But
so stay inside and away from death. And
yes, but the problem is you play as a courier, you play as a messenger person who's making deliveries, and it's like the worst. It's like the most stressful game. But you have to completely reorient your approach to obstacles, enemies, and things like that with that mechanic in play. And your entire job is to build pathways and bridges between different zones and areas to make travel a little bit more accessible, a little bit more possible, and try and, defeat your enemies without death, without killing them. So that's, I think, a really important turn. But the other, Death Stranding and another game called Borderlands 2 are games where that aren't in love with themselves. And this is a real problem I found with especially futuristic cyberpunky games, is games really want you to look at the world they've created. They're like, look at how pretty, like go up on the high spot and do, like Assassin's Creed has a whole mechanic where you have to get up on the high spot and you can see the city they've created. Freaking Legend of Zelda, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, you have to get up on the tower and you have to survey, and it's so pretty, and it has literal built-in moments where it forces you to appreciate how nice it all is. And on the one hand, good, very well done. But on the other hand, it's what you say, which is there's a sort of colonial quality to it, in that it's sort of, you're supposed to take from it. You're supposed to take and harvest and hunt and just kind of invade the beautiful space. And I think Borderlands 2 and Death Stranding have created locales and environments that, first of all, they're really intricately, excellently graphically designed games, but they're clearly not designed for you to just stop and go, whoa, look at this view. They're very brutal landscapes. They're very, Borderlands specifically is a genre called diesel punk, which is this post-apocalyptic world that's overrun by like people who drive like smoky Jeeps everywhere, basically. And it's like everything looks like a dumpster. Everything looks like a dumpster. It's very ugly. And then you get to a city called Opportunity. That's clearly sort of the cyberpunk ideal. Only you realize, wow, this is not beautiful at all. It's sterile and ugly. It is unbearably dry. And I think games that force you to confront environments in a not seductive way, and that's a really important philosophical turn, in my opinion, because there's an important decentering that happens where it's not all for you. It's not, you're not the main character necessarily of the world. So yeah, those are two, I think, important turns that I would like to see more of.
I really love that. Thank you so much. Michael?
I was about to point out that first of all, we have spoken quite a lot about primarily sandbox games, which features these mechanics, and of course, in particular, if we look at old video games, animalistic avatars or anthropomorphic animals is a staple of most platform games. Sonic the Hedgehog, for example, Ninja Turtles, Star Fox, the list goes on and on. Animals have always been a very important part of how avatars are part of the gaming culture. But I really like your point, Becky, regarding that games are very narcissistic, in a sense that, and this is like a paradoxical feature, because in a way, in order to facilitate that kind of immersion, you want to invite the player to sort of take center stage, be someone grand, own your environment, beat the obstacles. But at the same time, you sort of establish this kind of colonialistic narratives. And one major feature here is, of course, what kind of consequences do your actions lead to? And in particular, violence and death is an interesting mechanic here, because usually it doesn't really matter if you kill a lot of animals, other people, stormtroopers, because they respawn. Death is sort of disconnected from real consequence. Or even if you as a player dies, you reboot the game. And this is one of the features where I think that video games and tabletop gaming is kind of interesting, because when you lose a character, when you play Dungeons and Dragons, it is a really large taboo if you, as a player, says, no, I don't accept that my character is dead. I'm going to keep playing them because death means something. It is a consequence. If the character in a Dungeons and Dragons game dies, it is removed. You don't ever play that again. And that is one of the key features that video games sort of offer, that kind of death without consequence. And I think that's an important aspect to remember when talking about morality in terms of games.
I think those are both really important. One, in terms of thinking how you play the game. So, what you were saying there, Becky, about those two games is what mechanisms, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier, what mechanisms enable you to play the game? And if playing the game is really contingent on you using resources, using animals, abusing others, it's not to say that this directly means it's what you want to do in real life, but it can kind of shape a certain ethic of what we think of how we move, or maybe give hints at the logics we think our society operates on, right? And I think the games you mentioned earlier say, well, hang on, wait, what if going outside is not good? And what if death is something to be avoided? How do we then manage life? How do we come up with alternative solutions or to problems? And I think that that's really attractive. And same thing with what you're saying there, Michael, with regards to death mattering, is I think both of these point to the fact that there needs to be, it can't just be vapid. And gaming is supposed to be vapid to one extent. Gaming is not the serious thing. Gaming is supposed to be, it is serious based on all the industry and the money and all of but it's supposed to be, it's serious business, but it's also supposed to be fun and something people want to engage in. So if you're having too much in the way of morals and stuff, people are going to say, well, I don't want to play this. I don't want to play some moralistic. So you have to think, I think, about how to facilitate new thoughts and new ideas without being bombastic, which is a really interesting challenge, I think, for, let's say, animal advocates or anyone who's interested in thinking about matters related to that social justice movement, but any social justice movement, right? Whether you're interested in feminist movements, whether you're interested in, BIPOC movements, class movements, migration, I think gamers have to come up with really interesting ways to get people to think these thoughts, which is really it's a challenge, man. That's not easy. All right. Becky, do you have a quote for us? And then we'll wrap it up.
I had to default to a quote from actually film, because that's sort of my training. But it's a quote from Ang Lee, and I don't think he actually said it in a written interview, but I heard him say it at an event. He said, "It is only through pretense that we approach truth." And he said it about his film Lust Caution, which is about a female spy who pretends to be in love with someone and then falls in love with someone. But I think there's a lot there. It's very rich when we associate it with gaming, because as much as I dislike the way that politicians and mass media like to connect real life violence with video game violence, I think they're very, very different things. And I think that's a far too facile connection people make. I do, wonder about what do we become numb to as we become accustomed to things as just, that's how games are. That's what games do. And it's always with the games that sort of put a twist on things and ask, is this actually how it has to be? That then we are able to find new avenues of pretense. And I think that's, for me, what gaming's about a lot of the time. It's the most immersive kind of pretense that that can be an escape, but also at the end of the escape, you also find something about life that's maybe unavoidable.
Oh, well, that's beautiful. I can't think of a better way to end this episode. Really lovely, lovely. And I think it captures so much of what we've spoken about today, that it's political and it's challenging, but it's also beautiful and it's an outlet. And we have to find nuanced ways to have these conversations. So thank you so much. Before we leave, perhaps each of you could just give me a quick 1-minute synopsis about, I think you kind of said it in the intro, but what you're currently working on, and if people want to get in touch with you, how they can do so.
People can reach me through email, michael.rübsamen.ico.lu.se.
It will be in the show notes.
At Lund University through the webpage. I am currently working on a project where we watch how cosmic horror tabletop gaming in the game Call of Cthulhu can be used as placemaking and tourist branding of the city of Lund. Lund, the city of forbidden knowledge.
Oh, is this a game that exists?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
It's a tabletop role-playing game.
That's very cool. Well, I'm interested already. Well, there you go. Osvaldo?
Well, same. I'm better reached by email. As I said at the beginning, I come from very traditional training literary studies, and I have on the contract with Palgrave a book on what I call the invention of the lyric body. And it's a study of poetry and basically the invention of whiteness, and more specifically, blondness in archetypes of female beauty in Hispanic literature. And I covered this from the early modern period to the present. So it's been refreshing because I have been doing a lot of new media for a few years now. And that sometimes involves conducting a study on media that is not that sophisticated or complex, particularly when you come from a humanistic background. But now that's what I've been doing these last couple of years and having fun reading, poems by Baroque poets and romantic writers. So it's what I'm doing currently.
Are there poetry video games out there?
There are a few, but not as many. Lyricism is something that has not captured fully the imagination of game developers. So unfortunately, that continues to be more the runs of songwriting. I believe poetry is not only non-dead, but it's thriving in the world of songwriting. And but in video games, I see potential that has not been exploited, in my opinion.
Super interesting. Thanks so much, Osvaldo. And finally, Becky.
Yes, so people can reach me by email, and the manuscript I'm currently working on is on esports based on fieldwork in South Korea. I'm looking to tell the story of how esports has changed in the past 10 years, because the age of StarCraft has long passed. So sorry to the StarCraft fans out there. And we're in an age where the fight over intellectual property has kind of, legally speaking, ended. So how do Koreans grapple with playing and competing in games that they cannot own? And sort of, so there's a lot of the physical bodies that are playing the game and competing and creating this esports industry are Korean, but in terms of ownership of the culture and the all the revenue streams, sort of how much space can they carve out for themselves? That's kind of the story I've been tracing.
Wow. I mean, your knowledge on gaming is really outstanding, and I'd love to actually just learn more and read more about the work you're doing with regards to South Korea. And yeah, yes, there's just so much. All of you have been so interesting. I've learned a great deal. Thank you for letting me ask you questions from the sideline of someone who doesn't game. I've very, very much enjoyed talking to all of you today.
Same. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you, Michael, Becky.
Thank you so much to Osvaldo, Michael, and Becky for being just wonderful guests today, making it such an enjoyable discussion. Thank you also to Jeremy John for the logo and Gordon Clark for the bed music. Thank you so much to the sponsors of this season, including Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, the Pollination Project, as well as the School of Modern Language, the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts, and the School of Literature, Media and Communication at Georgia Tech University. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by myself. This is The Animal Turn, with me, Claudia Hurtenfelder.
For more great iROAR podcasts, visit iROARpod.com. That's iROARpod.com.